All right, good afternoon, everyone. Here we are for another sort of deep dive into the second essay, the longer of the two essays for the second half of the course. Again, I won't be bothering to use my camera, only because I want everyone to be able to see what I've got on the screen because there's a fair amount of text. So the first thing I want to do here is to share my screen by bringing up the actual instructions, and you should be able to see that. And so this is, as I mentioned, the longer essay number 2 that is due Sunday, March 26th, 2023, 11:59 p.m. Now, this longer essay is, of course, worth more than the first one. This one's 25%, and the length is also slightly longer. So between 800 to 1,000 words. 11 or 12 point font, that's fine. Doesn't really make a huge difference. It's more the word count that I'm concerned with than the number of pages. And here, the second essay is going to give students, once again, the opportunity to reflect on some of the ideas and concepts that we've looked at in the second half of the course. And that is a whole range of different things. We looked at utilitarianism again in more detail, deontology. We looked at euthanasia, arguments for and against, capital punishment, arguments for and against. We began the second half with social contract theories, or several of them: Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, John Stuart Mill, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. We'll also be talking about anarchy as well, ethics of caring, and finally the last two, terrorism and or the use of torture on terrorist suspects. So there's a full plate here for material to choose from. And like the first one as well, you only need to look at one. So students reserve the right to, one, devise their own original essay topics. If you do that, this is only if you come up with a brand new original idea. Contact me, let me know, only because I want to make sure that it will fit within a format of 800 to 1,000 words. And two, you can also modify slightly the essay topics as they are described below. So we're going to look at those. So if you make some serious modifications, shoot me a quick email just to let me know, and then we're going to make sure that it is something that's doable within the format of about 1,000 words. Okay, so once again, the same things: defending a position in a debate with reason, critical thinking, communication that is clear, concise, correct, well-written, and visuals if for some reason you need some. Most of these don't, but if there was some rare chance that that was necessary, by all means, go ahead. Okay, so let's take a look at some of the topics here, because it does cover pretty well the second half. All right, first, discuss the theories of utilitarianism and deontology, if applicable, because not always, but if applicable, to one of the following moral problems. So here you have a choice of one of two positions and a whole range of different things: doctor-assisted suicide, eugenics. I was before talking about monogamy. That's no longer on the table. Animal testing, animal rights, capital punishment, terrorism, the use of torture. In each one of these, there is the option to take a look at this topic from one of these two positions, right? Utilitarianism, the greater good; deontology, no, absolutely under no conditions are we supposed to use people as a means to an end, to lie to people, manipulate them. So there's no wiggle room with deontology. It's the same thing every time. So that's the first one. The second one: what difficulties encountered by individuals in a state of nature does the social contract solve? What is the essence of this contract? How does it work? Here, I would recommend maybe looking at one, and you can compare and contrast one with one other thinker, because as you know, by this point, Hobbes is really kind of on his own, describing a social contract that's pretty authoritarian and dogmatic. The others, Rousseau and Locke and John Stuart Mill, are much more flexible and much more nuanced in terms of trying to reflect this kind of democratic body politic that they are describing. So you could look at one of the three I've just mentioned, the last three, and see how much overlap there is. But if you're going to be looking at Hobbes, just remind yourself that he kind of stands on his own. It's usually Hobbes versus Locke or Hobbes versus Rousseau. So keep that in mind when you are looking at the state of nature and the social contract, because each thinker looks at it slightly differently. So it's up to you whether you want to indulge in just looking at one or compare and contrast with only one other thinker. Number 3, in your opinion, who has a better understanding of human behavior? Is it Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, Rousseau, Mills, or even Aristotle, because we talk about ethics of virtue and virtue being a positive trait, a positive social trait. So, in your opinion, out of all those thinkers, who has a better understanding? Now, again, I would focus ultimately on just one thinker. You can do a very sort of brief thumbnail sketch of the others, but I want the majority of the paper to be on the one thinker that you think provides the best understanding of human behavior. Let's say you think it's Aristotle. Okay, you can present Aristotle sort of in the introductory paragraph very briefly and say, okay, now before we do this and we return to Aristotle, let's take a look at the others. And then you can draw from each of these examples, however brief, to then compare it with Aristotle and allow Aristotle to come out to sort of on top in the argument, say that, yes, he had the better understanding of human nature. Now, doesn't have to be Aristotle, it could be any one of those thinkers. That's the beauty of this kind of work. There is no wrong answer, but it's the degree of persuasion that you use to convince me that one of those individuals has a better understanding of Aristotle. Number 4, understanding of human nature, my mistake. Number 4, according to Carol Gilligan, women and men think differently. What implications does this difference have on the possibility of forming either universal moral judgments or general ethical theories that might apply to both sexes? So what I'm implying here is Carol Gilligan is arguing that men and women think differently. So each sex thinks about things differently. Now, if that's the case, are we in the same position as we were earlier with cultural relativity, right? That there is no one universal moral judgment because each sex has its own. So the argument is, or the question becomes, is that in fact correct? Is there something in Gilligan's work that allows us to say, well, no, we may think differently, but there is still a fair amount of overlap where we could make universal moral judgments that are applicable to both. Is it the rule? Is it the morality? Or is it the means by which we achieve or arrive at that moral judgment? So if you want to look at Gilligan's work, consider that. And really the short answer is it's different means to the same ends. That's really what's happening. So the short answer here, yes, universal moral judgments are in fact possible because there is enough overlap that she presents in her ideas that we could make that argument. 5, Nietzsche argues that morality can be reduced to 2 basic types, master morality and slave morality, and to one basic difference between nobility and contempt. How does such a provocative argument benefit the world today? As you will see, Nietzsche is a very provocative thinker. This is an individual who looks to provoke individual thinking. That's really what he was about. And so the notion, or even if you want to call them trigger words, right? Master and slave. These are terms that we use very carefully these days because they imply so much. First of all, is the metaphor even sound, right? Is the metaphor reflective of what Nietzsche is actually trying to tell us? Because really what he's saying is he would like us to be masters of our life, or masters without slaves, right? We don't owe anyone anything. But the question becomes, at what point does this go too far and we become asocial or antisocial individuals? So it's a lot to consider, but Nietzsche does have some interesting things to say about self-realization, self-awareness. That's really what he's talking about when he talks about the master morality. But you could ask yourself the question, is this such a provocative metaphor that it kind of detracts from what he's trying to say? 6, given the level of terrorism in the modern world, do you support the use of state-sponsored torture against a terrorist suspect? If no, why should the use of torture be prohibited, regardless of the circumstances? So this is the very last class, the very last module that we have. So you'll have to look ahead if you want to take a look at this particular topic. But the idea here is the state allowed to use torture to extract information from terrorist suspects? Do terrorist suspects somehow fall into a different legal category than someone that has robbed a bank or has killed someone or has kidnapped someone, right? Do terrorist suspects, and again, remember, they're only suspects, have not been convicted. So is the state allowed to torture these individuals to get information at the faint chance that maybe they are not guilty they're not terrorists, because there is always that possibility that the state has the wrong person. So the question becomes, given the amount of terrorism in the world, does that give the powers that be a kind of green light to go ahead and use this kind of behavior to extract information from people? So it is, again, a very difficult topic. I'm going to show you a brief example of an essay where it was, in fact, a law student that took on this topic and wrote extensively, but very, very well. I was very pleased with the work. Okay, so those are the topics. Now, if you go to the submission box, you'll see a couple more that reflect some newer ideas. I do a module on anarchy, and there's some information there that you can take a look at by way of a question. But if you choose something entirely, well, not choose, but if you decide to do something entirely different, let me know and just fire off a quick email. Okay, so once it's done, deposit into longer essay number 2, make it in Word or a PDF. Don't send it to me in Pages because I can't see it, and make sure to follow APA or MLA formatting if need be. Okay, so let's close this for a moment, and I'm going to bring up the other page here that I want to show you. Whoops, hang on, because it's not showing me that you can see that. Okay, let's go share screen, and let's go to this one. Okay, so here, argument essay review. This is something you might want to ask yourself as you're going through in the introduction, because introduction is important. I need to know what this is about. Please have a title, because writing a title is really helpful for me, because at least I know where you're going with this particular paper, because otherwise I need to kind of read through the whole thing to get a sense of what the main argument is. So in the introduction, does it have a lead-in sentence? Does it mention the author or title of the essay that you've chosen? This could be a thinker. I'm going to write about Hobbes, Aristotle, Carol Gilligan, Nietzsche, whoever. Does the introduction have a clear thesis statement? Is your main thesis clearly stated in the introduction? So even if you're going to be writing about, let's say, human behavior, and you're saying that Hobbes is the one that has the best understanding because we are nasty, brutish individuals that are very self-centered, we're always looking at what's in it for me, etc., all the things that Hobbes says, make sure that it's presented concisely in the first paragraph, the introduction. So there's a clear thesis statement that outlines the argument. And finally, does the argument have an overview of the 3 argument points? Because you'll be writing basically 3 to 4 paragraphs. So let me know what you want to do. And that's very helpful, because I would recommend also writing the introduction after the body paragraphs are written, because in that way, when you show me the overview of the paper, it's the paper you have written, not the paper you would like to write or what you hope to write. I know it sounds not quaint, but maybe sort of an odd way to do things, but worry about the introduction after you've written the paper, because in that way, it reflects directly what you've actually written. Okay, body paragraphs. Do they have a clear topic sentence that outlines a supporting argument? Are the quotes integrated and explained? Why are you using a quotation, a citation, whether it's from my own slides or from a book? Why is it there? Are you constructing an argument leading up to the quotation, or taking the quotation as a starting point or beginning step towards creating an argument? Set it up in a way that is really useful and beneficial for you. Is the information from the text in APA format, author, page number, and so on, date of publication, if need be? I know it's a reflection essay, but some students like to use secondary sources, and that's perfectly fine. Just make sure that you cite it properly in the in-text or body paragraphs, and that you have a works cited page at the end. Does each body paragraph have a concluding sentence that mentions both sides of the comparison or the argument that you're trying to make? Does it provide a nice transition into the next paragraph? So this is really sort of the mechanics of essay writing, because it is important that the paper kind of flow in some way. Conclusion. Is the title and the author of the essay mentioned? These would be the essays that you're using, or if you're using my PowerPoint slides. Professor Matthews mentions in the slides on state-sponsored torture and the following. Okay, is the thesis restated? That's something that most of you do. That's really not an issue, or at least I've not seen, but it is good to do that, because in the same way that the introduction sort of narrows down the scope into the main thesis, conclusion widens the scope. It starts from the main thesis and it works its way back out. The points of the body paragraph summarized. Is there new information in the conclusion that should not be there? If it's really important, don't drop it into the conclusion. Figure out somewhere that you can put it in the body paragraphs so it is maximized in terms of its importance, because it may deal with a main point that you make sort of on a previous page. In other words, don't put new information into the conclusion. It should conclude what is already there. Is there a final sentence that clearly ends the essay? A really solid way to end your paper. Those are just all the ideas regarding conclusions, the overall sentence fragments, run-on sentences. If you're writing for the first time, you'll find that you tend to write run-on sentences. What I would do is go back when you give yourself some time, and even a judicious period here and there, breaks up those run-on sentences and still lets you say what you need to say without taking up an entire paragraph of just commas and semicolons. Okay, are there awkward sentences, awkward phrasing, unclear sentences? Are commas used correctly, semicolons used correctly? That's probably something that's not many students use, semicolons. They are really helpful if you want to have two ideas sit next to each other, but imply to the author that, to the reader, that person should consider those two thoughts at the same time. If they really need to be next to each other by way of contrast, comparison, emphasis, any of those transitional phrases, however, in fact, by comparison, on the other hand, all those little transitional phrases, if you really want the reader, myself, to think about those two ideas at the same time, use a semicolon. In-text citations, as I mentioned, is there a works cited page that's formatted correctly? All those things you should consider as you are writing your paper, but these are things that I've seen most students follow through with, but I just wanted to kind of point them out in kind of black and white. Okay, so to share the screen here one last time, I want to show you an essay that was written by a law student that I mentioned, an essay on the WikiLeaks file, Exposure on the Use of Torture by the United States. Boom, there it is. So this is very clearly an essay on a specific incident, which is the file leaks from WikiLeaks, then the resulting use of torture that is discussed in the WikiLeaks files by the US. So that is really a summary of almost the entire paper. So I know what it's about, the country involved, and the behavior. So we're just going to kind of scroll real quickly here, and a really nice introduction here. The following paper will reflect and critique. So there's a little bit of analysis here. The following paper will reflect and critique the widespread use of torture deployed by the hegemonic United States as exposed by the WikiLeaks files. Okay, so there's an opening statement. We're going to look at use of torture that is widespread as it is exposed in these papers that were leaked to the media and onto the internet. Additionally, this paper will highlight integral examples pertaining to the abhorrent use of torture tactics on detainees already here, right? This word right there, abhorrent use. I already know what this person's position is, that the use of torture is terrible. That's fine. You can state outright, but it's really good to put it right in the introduction, because then I'll say, okay, you clearly feel strongly about it. How and why? So those words, right, that is a particularly strong word. You can use it in the introduction because it sets the tone. Okay, torture tactics on detainees, specifically in military detention centers such as Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib. Now, Abu Ghraib is no longer around, but Gitmo still is in a very small form. This paper supports and endorses. And there it is, right? What are you doing? I'm doing this. I'm supporting and endorsing the position for the prohibition of torture in all circumstances, and will specifically look at the case of the United States as a key international player while referencing key philosophical foundations, exemplifying the need for abolishment of its use. Wow, that is a really good introduction, because it states clearly the position of the writer, their feelings about the topic, and why they're doing it, right? Because clearly the US is practicing something that it claims not to do. And although we now know that they were able to get away with this lie until the WikiLeaks. So how does that change things? So we've got some breakdowns here, the torture and human rights paradigm. They go through here and give us lots of information. Then the WikiLeaks file, a very brief case analysis. And here is our APA citation. The WikiLeaks file exposes the Afghan war diary, which reveals an astonishing 91,731 individual logs of soldier combat in Afghanistan, where numerous civilians were the victims. Assange, 2015, page 83. So that is exactly what we're looking for. Now, I'm not saying that every paper needs to have secondary sources. It is, after all, a reflection essay. But if you need to put that information in there, make sure that it's properly cited. So it carries on. And again, it is detailed and perhaps a little bit long, but a very, very good paper. Now, here is, for example, what would be a reference to my own work. And it says here, the use of torture inflicts overwhelming pain, terror, and panic, and finally, humiliation on the victim. And the author writes, I found this week 13B of my papers. Now, perhaps the only other thing that might have been missing here would be my name. I'm going to just say, okay, it was identified otherwise. So week 13B, slide 12. That's where they found this information. So we carry on. And lots of information, concluding remarks. So right here, the use of torture and abuse committed by the U.S. in times of war is not justified under any circumstances, as revealed by the WikiLeaks files, and further supports the widespread use of torture and abolishment. Torture is ineffective in its rationale, in addition to the egregious acts of suffering and harm inflicted on the civilian, which in turn also violates existing customary international law. Moving forward, the case of the U.S. should be examined critically to show how torture must not be allowed and is not morally permissible. Absolutely solid ending. This is, to me, a very, very good paper because it has all the items that I mentioned in the list. So references here, Assange J 2015, WikiLeaks files, and in Random House. So that's where it came from. Now, yes, there was also my own material. Now, the way in which it works for my PowerPoint slides, because they have not been published, you do not need to put them in the references or works cited page or bibliography, but I would like you to at least cite them in the in-text paragraphs. So as we saw here, module 13B, the only thing that would be missing would be my name. So it would be Matthews, comma, module 13B, comma, slide 12, 15, whatever it may be. That would be the only thing that I would say was missing from this otherwise very, very good paper. So keep that in mind. But the important thing here is to remember, if you're using my material, quote in the in-text paragraphs, but you do not need to have an entry in your works cited page. Any other material, the textbook or any other books, essays that you find, please make sure to cite them properly with proper citation, APA citation in body paragraphs, as well as a works cited page. I think that is pretty well it. I'm not sure how long we went, maybe 20, 25 minutes, but I just wanted to show you some of the ideas, some of the thoughts, some of the topics, but do have a look at both. Because I think if you look at the other one, the one is in the submission box, you'll see it's slightly updated to reflect some of the newer material that I put into this course, in particular the topic of anarchy. So if you have any questions, quick email to me at ematthews@fanchaonline.ca for any questions pertaining to the essay. And it's due again on the 26th, Sunday, the 26th of March. So we still have a couple of weeks, week and a half. It is only the 10th, but time is really flying by. So I just want to make sure that everyone knows when things are going to be due. Once again, any questions, quick email, and I will answer them as soon as I see them. In the meantime, though, thanks very much for listening to this, and we'll talk soon. Bye-bye.